welcome to the morning show. We're coming to you today on WJOP-LP Newburyport at FM 96.3 and on Channel 9. And we'll also be available on Newburyport Community Media's YouTube channel at ncmhub.org. I'm your host, Mary Jacobsen, and today I am just delighted to welcome Cyd Raschke here. Cyd has a PhD in social psychology, and she worked on writing in the corporate world, eventually moving to Newburyport, where she and her husband raised 2 sons. Her contributions to our community have been extensive, having served on the board of directors of the YWCA, the Unitarian Church, the Newburyport Education Foundation, and currently on the board of the Coastal Trails Coalition. She was also one of the 3 co-founders also of the Newburyport Black History Initiative, along with Dr. Cabria Baumgartner and city project manager Jordy Vining, a project which received the 2024 Award of Excellence by the American Association of State and Local History. Congrats on that, Cyd. She's here today, though, to talk about a different kind of venture and adventure. Her recently published book, Home of the Spirit Animals. So first off, Cyd, welcome to the morning show. Thank you for coming here, and thank you for all the things you've done for Newburyport.
My pleasure. It's a great community, and many, many, many hands make light the work.
Yes. We were just bragging on Newburyport together just before we started this show, agreeing
Yes.
it's a pretty remarkable and unique place.
You promised you wouldn't divulge that.
Beware.
Uh-oh.
Well, Cyd, you know, the first thing I wanted to ask you about is just tell people a brief synopsis of the plot line of, I'd call it an historical adventure story, Home of the Spirit Animals.
Indeed, that's the perfect encapsulation. Historical adventure story. Well, it begins with Neme, and she's a young Native American girl that is the only slave in her tribe. But unfortunately, she has her father's warrior blood. That's why she was captured in the wars, which are over at this point. But she realized now that she's becoming a teenager, she has to escape, but there's just seems to be no means of escape. Meanwhile, Diego, he is a Spanish sailor on an expedition to bring the finest horses in the world to the Orient, which is what they called it back then, the Orient. Only his captain and he, even though he knew every map, being a young person on a ship, that there were 2 humongous continents in the way, North and South America. And also, too, we can brag in this country that we have the worst hurricanes in the world. And no matter how bad the tempests are on the European coast, and they're bad, they can't hold a candle.
Yeah.
Only typhoon can equal what the hurricanes. So he gets washed up. 5 of the ship's horses survive, and they get washed up on a barrier island and eventually are captured as well by the tribe that has Neme. So she sees a way to escape.
And many adventures happen after that. So one of the things that shines through on every page of your novel is your extreme love and admiration for horses. And so I was hoping that you would tell us when and how your passion for horses began, Cyd.
So I can honestly say I don't remember, because my love for horses has been as long as I've had conscious memory. So that passion started before my memory kicked in.
Great. That's wonderful. Well, tell us about your research into the origins of wild horses and what role the evidence played that Equus actually began, not where most of us learned that it did. And that was one of the inspirations, I think, for your writing this story. So tell us about the fossil evidence, the research, and tell us the straight story.
Right, yeah. I do have, my degree is in research. And so my automatic go-to method is to find 3 independent sources with every fact that I don't know. And, you know, Smithsonian might be one, universities might be one. And I found a great resource in local historical organizations or museums. The local area, they do know the truth about their own community. So that's how I did the research. The reason why I was inspired to do this and delve into that research is that I grew up in horse country in Southwest Washington State, and we all had horses. It wasn't like here with the dressage, and it was all trail riding. My cousin was a barrel racer.
Okay.
Yeah, and we just did trail riding. I didn't even own a bridle, a proper. I owned a bridle, but I didn't own a saddle. But I usually rode him with the halter. I didn't. If
just bareback.
I had a bareback pad, but yes, I rode bareback a lot.
Okay.
And then someone told me, those wild horses, and the closest ones to us, I think, were in Oregon and Idaho. They're not wild. They're feral. They, centuries ago, they escaped from the Europeans, and eventually, that rocked my world.
Yeah.
I went through the 5 stages of grief: anger, denial, bargaining. Yeah, and when I got to the point of acceptance, I thought, what a great story.
Yeah.
These arrogant Spanish, and they had every right to be arrogant. They ruled the world at the end of the 15th century, and they did have the finest horses in the world. There was no contest because they had the Arabians from North Africa. They developed their own breeds, like the Andalusians and so on. And even their Iberian horses were very sturdy on the Iberian Peninsula. So what a great story that the horses escaped and became wild. And I wanted to write that story.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's great. Well, one of the other inspirations you talk about is your own indigenous heritage.
Right.
Mixed indigenous and Scandinavian. But tell us about your indigenous side of your family.
Well, I'm only 1/8 Aleutic. So I was born in Alaska. My mother was born in Alaska. She was orphaned, though, and our grandfathers and great-grandfathers were Scandinavian, mostly Finn. But that's the problem with indigenous people, descendants, is your grandmother dies. My mother never knew her mother. She was a baby when her mother died. And then that just breaks the connection, and you don't get to know the roots. And it was actually only recently I knew I was Aleutic. I thought I was Yupik Eskimo. But then my cousin, my grandmother is a sister of his grandmother, told me we were Aleutic, which is a very small Alaskan native settlement on Bristol Bay where all the salmon and king crab are.
Okay.
Yeah, but my mother and her sisters, unfortunately, my grandfather being widowed, had to send them to a boarding school, and God bless Methodist women, because they had a farm. They took in, it was a boarding school for fishermen and people that went up the north. But it also was an orphanage, and she got an excellent education. In fact, when she eventually went, here's another interesting fact about this, and I'm digressing very far from this.
It's very interesting because that's another story.
That's another story.
Yeah.
I have started that story as well.
Yeah.
But the U.S. Navy took over the orphanage during World War II because it was on this protected Resurrection Bay. It was in Seward, Alaska. And so they kicked all the kids out. They found places for them to go, but luckily Alaska wasn't very populated in World War II. So farm families took all the kids in, and my mother was lucky enough to stay with her sisters. Her brother stayed back in Seward. He was old enough to stay. But I thought that was quite interesting. But when she got to the school, my dad, who was at the school, his parents were working up in Alaska, grandparents. They helped organize the farmers into a co-op so they could sell their vegetables to the lower 48.
Oh, what a great idea.
Yeah, that was a nice story. Great people up there.
Yeah.
They were part of the colonists. They were duped by the federal government during the Dust Bowl. They said, there's doctors waiting for you, we have homes waiting for you, and there was neither doctors nor homes. But a lot of them stayed, and they have schools named after my foster grandfather and all sorts of wonderful things like that.
And what role did knowing that about your own family heritage and some of the loss that I'm sure you must have felt about losing that connection after you knew what it was, how did that impact your desire to write a novel that included as one of the main characters a Native American teenager?
Right. I would say that the inspiration for the novel was the very interesting time of the Columbian Exchange, when we learned so much about the world. That was probably my main inspiration, but it's so complicated, the connection I have with my Native American ancestry, because I take after the Scandinavian side of my family. My two brothers are dark hair, brown eyes. They look like our ancestors, but I do not look like our ancestors. So I would never outwardly say I was Native American heritage until I went to a conference of people like me who had lost their connection to their ancestors. And I found out, compared to at least a third of the people there, I had a higher percentage of that heritage. But they looked like they were probably something indigenous, and I didn't. And I realized, just because I don't have the outward manifestation doesn't mean I can't own that. So I was already an adult at that point.
Wow.
I didn't want to take advantage of anything because I hadn't really invested in it. But then I did the 23andMe research, found out where, in fact, in Alaska, some of the native populations are very recently Asian. So the two people that were identified in my DNA one was Mongolian, and the other was Yakut or Saka people of northeastern Siberia. And here's the interesting thing about them: even though the Aleutic don't have horses, because they're on the coast, the Bristol Bay is not forgiving. Those two populations to this day are horse people.
No kidding, really? So it's in your heritage.
Indeed.
So no wonder it was kind of like there from pre-memory for you.
And it explained a lot.
Yeah, I'm sure it must have. Oh, that's a great story, Sid. Thank you very much for sharing that.
Certainly.
Well, you've mentioned your attraction to the age of exploration, basically, but I'd like to learn more about what does fascinate you about that time period. And related to that, what role did our local Newburyport Custom House Maritime Museum play in your research about this time period and about the ships?
Yeah. So, again, during the Columbian Exchange, horses returned to the land of their ancestors, and which is something I didn't know, that, like you said, that Equus evolved in America and the grasslands of Canada, the plains of North America, and then crossed the land bridge to Asia. But the other story that was interesting to me was exactly how the Columbian Exchange, I call it when two worlds collide, and in very negative ways, as we all know.
Yeah.
But, for example, before the explorers, Europe didn't have tomatoes. Tell that to the Italians.
Yeah.
They didn't have potatoes. Tell that to the Germans and the Irish. And tell Belgium there was no chocolate. And it goes on down the line. There were also sweet peppers, corn, all down the line. Were never in Europe.
What were they eating?
I shudder to think.
Turnips.
Yeah, thank you, America. I wonder, did they have turnips? They didn't have squash.
Maybe not.
Yeah, they probably did. They probably did. So that was the other thing I found so fascinating, which I thought would add to the story.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally.
And then the second part of your question. So I'm doing all this research. I spent a year and a half doing the research. And after a year and a half, I said, you know what, you've got to start writing this story. quit going down the rabbit hole, as people say. But only thing that really tripped me up, and of course you can just imagine all the books and and fiction and historical fiction that are set. It's not really historical fiction, but so many nonfiction books are written about that, and there's so much research. So we have a lot available, but I did not have to me, satisfactory description of what the inside of the ship would have been that left Spain for the Orient. And then the Custom House Maritime Museum about 9 years ago brings in El Galeon. And I was down there every day. I would crash private parties by telling people I was there to volunteer. And you know how those things go. There's always something to do. So I was there every day, sometimes twice a day.
Just blend in with the caterer.
Right. Although we did spring money for the gala, which was not inexpensive. And so that was wonderful. And like you said, I did talk to the crew. It was wonderful.
Yeah, because this was a recreation of, a 15th century sailing ship, and you talked to the crew, and what kinds of things did the crew tell you? What were some of the surprising things that you learned about the glories of being a sailor at that time, or the hardships, or I would never want to do that in my life?
Right. I actually sort of knew all of that, but I just to go down in the hold and look at the stairs and look at how everything was arranged. Look at the ropes, incredible ropes that they had in a big, beautiful coil. And then the rigging. And I would, in fact, there's so many images that are in my book that I got by just standing on the very, very top of El Galeon, just looking up and down the river and looking through the rigging. And in fact, there are just, the rigging is in the book.
Yes, very excellent descriptions. You put those experiences to good use.
Right. Oh, thank you. Thank you. So it was mostly just the physical aspects of the ship, and of course their pride, because they despite whatever may have happened, they definitely deserve to be proud of the courage it took.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think you had mentioned earlier how small these ships were.
Yes.
That went all the way across the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah. It's just stunning because more recently, I think that was 2016 that El Galeon came, and more recently, I don't know if it was the Custom House or somebody brought in a recreation of one of Columbus's ships, and that was the first thing I was struck by going down to the boardwalk. This is so little. How did they make it across the ocean in this?
Yeah.
So it took courage and imagination and grit and gumption.
All of the above.
Now, your book is set where the hurricane takes, the two main characters is Texas, basically. Partly the coastal country, which I think would be, in effect, around where Galveston is now, but also the hill country of Texas. And I was telling you that I visited the hill country, and your descriptions are so spot on. I thought, Cyd really nailed this.
Okay.
Now, what made you choose Texas as the setting for your novel? And I believe you mentioned a field trip, so tell us about that.
Well, there were 3 reasons. I needed land that was hospitable enough for the horses to get from point A to point B.
Yeah.
And although they do encounter alligators, it would not be like Florida, where they're just, lurking on back then, over 500 years ago, lurking on the coasts and so on. Not everywhere, not northern Florida as much, for example, which is good horse country. But, so I needed an abundance of shipwrecks. I needed land for them to land on, and then hill country for them to eventually thrive.
Yeah.
And when I was researching all of these things to find a setting, there are hundreds and hundreds of shipwrecks, of historical ancient shipwrecks off the coast of Texas. Possibly more than any other place in the country. I don't know, maybe up where we are. Could have
plenty of shipwrecks on Plum Island, yeah.
Right. And so that factored in. And I hadn't picked a name for the ship, but one of the ships, it's nowhere near like the San Esteban, but the San Esteban is one I picked that was much later, 100 years later. But that is a name of the ship. But what drew me into the actual area, which would be quite a bit further south in Galveston, is that when the colonists arrived to settle Texas, they discovered, they came in by ship, and they discovered an island full of horses and no people. And they named it Mustang Island. I said, okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
This has happened.
That nailed it.
This has happened.
Well, thanks for that, Sid. Now, your book is called Home of the Spirit Animals. And so what's the significance of spirit animals? And, of course, I want to ask you, are horses your spirit animal?
Well, it begins by spirit animals is a nod to, there are 4 religions in the book. And the creation spirit is what I've decided to call the deity, so to speak, that the tribes and First Nation people honor. But animal, have you ever seen the medicine cards? Book
Yes.
And cards.
Not for a long time, but I know what you're talking about.
Right, that's animal medicine.
Yeah.
So, of course, I picked the horse card during one of those
course.
where you have to sort of quiet yourself and sort of meditate and then choose a card. I'm also born in the Chinese year of the horse.
Of course.
And my modern zodiac is Taurus, the bull, which is also the zodiac sign for the horse. So yeah, I come by it honestly. So the answer is yes, it's my spirit animal. But for Neme, of course, the horses died out in the Ice Age, so that's why they initially weren't there when the Europeans came over. But there's fossils everywhere, and also cave art, and so she dreams of creatures that she's never seen.
Yeah.
And she gets a message that they can save her. They can help her find freedom, is the way she describes it. And so when she sees them, she makes the connection. She falls to her knees. I don't know if you remember that scene. She collapses to her knees.
Yeah. It's like your dream came alive in front of you.
Exactly.
It's a dramatic scene.
Right.
Yeah. And
Right.
emotional as well. Yeah.
Right, yeah. Very pivotal.
Yeah.
But she doesn't know what to make of Diego. And the sad thing is that Diego was one of the few literate people on the ship. And so he has no skills at all. He was the youngest of a lot of brothers, and so he had been a cabin boy since maybe 12 or 13, something like that. So he has no survival skills whatsoever. I mean, the sailors are very handy. But he was the scribe. He was the assistant scribe for the ship, so he wasn't one of those sailors that could survive on a desert island for the rest of their lives.
But he's adaptable and a quick study.
Yeah.
And it's also interesting that one of the things he does for his shipmates is he tells stories, which they value enormously. And it's sort of an homage in your book to the power of storytelling.
Right.
So.
I'm glad you brought that up because I know you were curious about what things I learned that made an impact on me. And in one of the nonfiction books about the Age of Exploration, they mentioned that in the captain's quarters there were only 2 books. One was the Bible, and one was Amadis de Gaula. So I just kind of got curious, what is this book? And I looked it up, and the researchers had, people that were interested in that, in early literature, had claimed it was the first world's best-selling novel.
Oh, how interesting.
Because at the beginning of the printing press, of course, there's some civic laws and religious scriptures. Those were published right away. But this story of Amadis de Gaula, it's kind of like a King Arthur, a little bit like, it's kind of a combination of Moses and King Arthur.
Oh,
yeah.
Interesting combination.
Yeah. Yeah, because the unwed princess, unfortunately, her betrothed dies somehow, and so she puts her son in a little boat. It's not a basket like down the Nile.
Close enough.
In a boat, and ships it off, and then a knight finds it and raises Amadis with honor. So he slays lions and goes into communities and defends the innocent from raiders and things like that. So it had been told for hundreds of years, and finally someone wrote it, and it Cervantes has a copy in his museum in Spain.
Oh, no kidding. Okay, interesting. Well, Sid, I really enjoyed just the story, because it is an adventure story at heart. Chase scenes, battles, fights, and all kinds of adventurous things happen to these two young people. And, background of a growing love stories. It has everything. But your book also has chapter notes that you include at the back of the book with information about history, geography, the food they're eating, the animals. They call horses tall dogs, by the way, because they don't know what else to call them, and the culture. And it helped me deepen my understanding of what the characters were encountering and dealing with. And I also just learned a lot that was really interesting, as I am from our conversation right now. For example, one of the things that I started worrying about the horses as soon as I figured out, are they going to put these horses on one of these little tall ships? I thought, how are they going to do that? And just learning about how they had these slings that they would use to lift the horses on board. And then I was worried about the weather. I thought, their legs. But they also, when there would be a storm, because of course there were storms and ultimately a hurricane that wrecked the ship, and they would also use those slings, those on the boat, to lift the horses so they were suspended in the air until the storm passed. And they also exercised the horse on the decks of the boat because they had found out they needed to do that. So all of those things allayed my fears for the horse, although they must have hated it. They must have, I imagine, just hated being suspended in the hardwood. And I was just curious about maybe some of the discoveries that you made in your research. You've talked about some of them, and I don't know if there's any other one that might come to mind, one that particularly surprised you or engaged you, either about the horses or the sailing or the Native American tribes. I'm just curious to find out whether there was something that was a surprise to you.
All right. Well, following up on what you said, I was unaware of the slings as well. But I don't know how clear I made it, but the horses chosen for this expedition were chosen from a young age. In fact, I think the groom tells Diego that the youngest horse, who was not as well trained, she was the best swimmer, and they wanted a young horse, a filly. The only one who was a little spoiled was the Andalusian mare, but the rest of them were all chosen because of their ability to stand on a wiggly dock, to swim, and also tolerate the sling. So they knew that was not, they didn't experiment on the ship. They did a couple test voyages, so to speak. I did mention the novel that I found interesting, but something that I think about from time to time, because it does come up, is that I was unaware pigs were not native to the Americas. Yeah. And so I have pigs survive. In fact, the horses follow them, which they don't normally do, because pigs are survivors. They just are, And they are now what is destroying lands in Texas, even all the way up to Saskatchewan, Alberta. They, over the generations, they grew hair to tolerate the sun. And unfortunately, they spread disease in crops. They destroy the land when they come through, and they're just so tenacious. They're very hard to get rid of.
And really smart. And
yes, they're very, very smart.
They're very intelligent animals.
Yeah,
so
and
they found their way.
Right. And I mean, I did learn that horses were, I think, in the top 15 of the smartest animals, but pigs are way up there.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Yeah, and the fact that they were able to grow hair and protect themselves from the sun. Well, anyway, there's lots to learn in your book and from your book, as well as the adventure part. I'm curious to find out, Cyd, what have you been hearing from readers?
I'm hearing a lot of what you said.
Okay.
I learned a lot. I learned a lot. In fact, I have a friend, I think she knows everything. She said, I learned a lot. So, and that was another inspiration for writing the story. It might surprise a lot of people, and I apologize to Jordy and Cabria on the Black History Initiative. I did not like history in school.
You're kidding me.
I did not like it. It wasn't told in a way that was interesting. On the other hand, I love my English literature class. I love my Spanish class. But I said, I guess I'm just not interested in history. And and I wasn't.
Yeah.
But again, with the Columbian Exchange, that was so interesting. I thought if somebody had put this in story form,
Yes, absolutely.
or some other way of learning. Schools are much better now. I've been around a while, so it was okay. This war was in this year, and
that's right.
And so that is very gratifying to me because to learn something while you're enjoying a story, I mean, it just enriches your life in general.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I didn't like history, and I was an English major undergrad as well because of how it was taught. It was all about battles, and not even about why they were battling. It was just about naming the battles and the dates and naming the generals and memorizing those things, and it just didn't add the human dimension. The story level about what was really going on, what were the emotions, what were the politics of the time, and what were people thinking and feeling, people that I could relate to and identify with. So absolutely. Well, I'm really glad that they changed the way they teach history and wrote about it, and that it caught up with you. Cyd, is there anything I haven't asked you about that you would like to talk about regarding Home of the Spirit Animals?
Oh my goodness, I did bring notes. Let me quickly look.
Of course.
I would have to say that the only thing that, well, first of all, I married a historian.
Well, that would be perhaps transformative in your attitude toward history and historians.
Right. A professor at Duke for 5 years.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he would talk about ancient history and point out how the Bible got this story from the Assyrians, and then they got this story from... He had a co-ed, a very devout religious co-ed, run from his lectures crying because it's the first she knew the Bible might not be the absolute truth. And even though it's wonderful, all the stories in there, but they were a collection of different cultures and
which is
different
eye-opening
peoples.
and expands your perspective on the world.
Right.
History.
It doesn't,
the things we learn.
Exactly. It doesn't make the Bible wrong. It's just that it had to condense. Let's just put it that way. It had to condense. But so he was a good research resource for me because he knew a lot of things off the top of his head. So that made a lot of things very efficient. And he had a lot of books. And then once he found out I was going to do this, then he amassed a huge collection. I'd have stacks of books 2 feet high. So that was an interesting thing. Of course, now I find I think there are 2 things that happen when you become mature. You realize how incredible birds are, and the other thing is history becomes a little bit more interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. History becomes something of a necessity in order to really understand your present.
Right.
And as a friend of mine says, history is hope.
True.
Because throughout history, people have gotten themselves out of. There is always change over time. Sometimes it takes a long time, but things always do change.
Yeah.
Well, Cyd, are you working on something new?
I did leave some seeds of things that could happen when Diego's best friend gets left behind, and it's clear he's sweet on the medicine woman's daughter. That could eventually develop into something. Also, the horsemanship of particularly the Comanches. When the explorers made it into the Southwest and the Southern Plains, the Comanches, they already had horses for hundreds of years because there was a delay in between. And they were the best horse people in the world. And, maybe the Mongolians, equal to that. They just knew, and you might, when you read the novel, you saw the Native American young man who was lame.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
He and the finely trained stallion, not the lead stallion, who was pretty fierce. But right after I decided to have him have extra motivation to ride a horse,
Yes.
because he could finally hunt, he could finally travel, and he couldn't before. And he was the chief's son, which made it. And he was very bright and a wonderful young man. So it just changed his life
Yeah, it's
altogether.
really transformative for him and his role in the tribe.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And then I would read stories of how people that lost their legs in accidents, that are healthy, that they can turn to horses to
Absolutely.
to have recreation.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, Cyd, please tell us the name of the website that people can go to learn more about your book and about you.
So it's firstfoal.com. So foal, for those who don't know, is what a brand new newborn horse is called before they become a colt or a filly. It's a foal, and because it means it needs its mother. And so it's all one word, firstfoal.com.
And you can get all kinds of information there about Cyd's book and about Cyd's background as well.
Thank you, Mary.
Cyd, it's been so much fun to talk to you. I really enjoyed your book, as you can probably tell, and learned a lot from it.
Yeah.
And it's just been really fun to talk to you. And I hope you will write a follow-up, because I know that will be just as engaging
Well,
and informative
Thank
as
you.
well.
Likewise, it was very enjoyable meeting you. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Well, that's it for today, everybody. Please join us again next Thursday at 9 for the morning show. Until then, everybody, please be well.